An insult dropped into the airplane cabin and tore through the already fragile air. "If you are that weak, then you should not be flying." Linda Garrett's voice landed like metal hitting the floor. Cold sharp, carrying naked contempt. Harold Jenkins froze his aged hand, trembling against the strap of his soft travel bag. His eyes flickered between shame and helplessness. No one looked directly at him. No one dared breathe too loudly. The cabin's silence felt like a desperate endorsement of the humiliation that had just unfolded. 4 rows away, Natalie Brooks lifted her head. She wore a grey beanie, an old hoodie, a bare face, glasses that softened but could not hide the calm, razor-sharp eyes beneath. No one knew she was the CEO of Aurora Air, a woman who had spent 3 consecutive weeks flying undercover as an anonymous passenger to observe the rotting culture spreading inside her own company. She sat in seat 28 Bravo, a cramped middle seat perfect for feeling every distorted pulse of this failing system. Natalie watched Linda as if a camera were capturing every detail, every sideways glance, every curt sigh, every step carried with the posture of a warden rather than someone meant to serve. Linda, 56 years old, stiff blonde hair, red lipstick like a seal eyes, sharp as blades. 28 years of seniority had turned her into a fortress of arrogance and abuse. She did not serve passengers. She controlled them, commanded them, shoved them into narrow corners of humiliation and submission. Meanwhile, young flight attendant Emily Rhodes quietly bent down to help a woman adjust her seatbelt. She smiled, gentle, small, almost invisible. A faint patch of light amid the dense shadow Linda cast across the cabin. Natalie jotted a note into the small notebook hidden in her sleeve. Garrett hostile attitude, 27 Alpha elderly. Her handwriting was neat, cold, steady, like the heartbeat of someone preparing for large-scale surgery. No one knew this note, and dozens of others would become the first evidence of a reckoning that would in just a few hours swallow the career of the woman ruling the cabin. Harold tried to lift his water bottle, but his hands trembled too hard. He pressed the call button. The light came on. 1 minute passed, then 2, then 3. Linda ignored it, chatting with Emily about the annoying types of passengers these days. Natalie slid past the irritated businessman beside her and walked to row 27 Alpha. Her voice was low, warm, soft enough not to draw attention. "Are you all right, sir?" The old man nodded, eyes glistening. "I just need some water for my medicine, but they—" Natalie turned toward the galley. When she pushed the curtain aside and stepped in, the whole cabin seemed to tighten. Linda spun around her eyes, sharp enough to slice skin. "What are you doing in here?" Her voice stabbed. "Passengers are not allowed in the galley. Get out now." Natalie kept her voice gentle, without confrontation or fear. "The gentleman in 27 Alpha needs water for his medication. His call light has been on for a while." Emily's eyes widened with guilt, and she moved instinctively, but Linda pressed a hand onto her arm, stopping her. "He can wait. This is a crew area. Get out." Natalie looked directly into Linda's eyes. No words, only silence. A deep silence that made Linda retreat half a step in her mind, even if her body remained rigid. A silence that made others feel they had just made a mistake without knowing what it was yet. When Linda turned her back, Emily quickly slipped Natalie a small water bottle. "I am sorry," she whispered, voice trembling. Natalie returned to Harold, opened the bottle for him. He tried to smile in gratitude, but his lips quivered. In his eyes, Natalie saw a feeling far too clear the fear of being a burden, a fear that should never exist in any airplane cabin. She sat back down and wrote toxic seniority culture, young staff suppressed protection system. Another line like a scissor blade, preparing to cut the last thread, holding decades of misconduct together. Linda walked past again, her footsteps pounding the carpet like silent orders. A man asked about Wi-Fi. She pointed at the instruction card. A young mother asked to switch seats for her child. Linda snapped, "No seats are locked." Every action revealed a warped sense of power that had been fed for far too long. The cabin gradually settled. The lights softened. But Natalie knew this calm was temporary. It was the quiet of a jungle seconds before a wild beast lunges. She lifted her gaze, watching Linda, as if watching a fuse burn toward an explosive. Linda was too tense, too easily provoked, too accustomed to zero resistance, and the system behind her was decayed to its core. Everything was waiting for one spark, one final mistake, one moment Linda could not pull back. She did not know the girl in seat 28 Bravo. She did not know that the clicking of a pen against a small notebook was the sound of a safety catch being released on a looming purge. She did not know the passenger she would soon unleash her anger on would not bow, would not fear, and would not forgive. She did not know that in just a few hours the name Natalie Brooks would end the 28-year empire she clung to. Linda had just dropped a match onto a full tank of gasoline, and the Airbus was slowly becoming a courtroom suspended in the sky. The first light tremor hit like a warning, tipping the airplane cabin ever so slightly. The seatbelt sign lit up the sharp ding, slicing through the air, but the real jolt didn't come from the wings. It came from the look in Linda's eyes when she saw the small paper cup on Harold's tray slide and spill a few droplets onto the floor. Just a few, a tiny trail of water that could have been wiped away with a sleeve. But to Linda, it was a spark. She stopped, her eyes narrowed. Anger curled through her like rising heat, tearing apart the thin mask of professionalism she wore. "What did you just do?" Her voice shot past the acceptable volume, slapping every passenger in the cabin. Harold jerked awake, his trembling hand hovering above the tray. "I'm sorry I fell asleep." Linda lunged forward. "This is a $200 uniform. Did you know that? Or do you not care? Because you are not the one paying to fix it." Each word sank into the cabin like the smell of burning plastic, toxic and stubborn. Passengers turned their heads. A few widened their eyes. A few looked down. A few lifted their phones but lowered them immediately when Linda's glare swept past. Survival instinct to avoid confrontation with someone holding power and losing control. Natalie set her pen down. She stood up. Not quickly, not dramatically, simply rising the way a sharp line cuts through thick air. Linda turned her eyes full of challenge. "You again." "What do you want?" Natalie didn't answer immediately. She stepped forward, slow, deliberate, each movement claiming space. The white cabin light washed over her face, revealing no trace of fear. "He is an elderly passenger. It was an accident." Linda smirked, the smirk of someone who believed she was untouchable, who viewed everyone as props for her irritation. "An accident. Let me tell you something. People like him shouldn't be flying if they cannot control themselves." The sentence dropped like a stone into still water. No one moved. Air seemed to drain from the cabin. Natalie felt something tighten across the sky, tightening around Harold's throat, tightening around every value that should have been protected. She shifted, positioning herself between Harold and Linda. A line had just been drawn. You do not speak to him like that. It was not a plea, not a request, not a suggestion. It was a declaration. Linda froze for a second, then barked a laugh, drenched in contempt. Who do you think you are? Her eyes scanned Natalie from head to toe. The grey beanie, the cheap hoodie, the darker skin, the boarding pass that looked like it belonged to someone with a modest income. Her gaze changed. Something uglier surfaced. Of course. People like you always love sticking your nose where it does not belong. The words people like you dropped like a dull blade, not sharp enough to cut clean, but slow enough to wound deep. The cabin held its breath. Emily stood at the back, her fingers crushing a tissue into wrinkles. She bit her lip silently, begging Linda to stop. But Linda had already crossed the point of no return. Do not act up here. You are a passenger. I am the lead flight attendant. I command you obey. I obey when you are right. Natalie answered, her voice steady, unbroken. A cold, straight line sliced through the air. Linda flushed, stepping close enough that the bitter scent of her morning coffee brushed Natalie's face. I do not like your attitude. You think you know the rules. You think you have the right to talk back to me. Natalie did not move. You are abusing your authority. And you owe him an apology. Silence detonated through the cabin, thick enough to feel the faint vibration of seat belts. Linda froze for 1 second, then 2. Her eyes cracked open with a thin, dangerous fracture. She was being challenged in front of the entire cabin, a queen confronted by someone she believed was beneath her. Old power pushed back by a sharper, silent force, and Linda snapped. What do you want? You want me to apologize? You demand that because you think you are special. Then she said the sentence she should never have said. The sentence that would destroy her. Typical. Exactly the kind who loves causing trouble. The stench of racism in the words was unmistakable, unavoidable, undeniable, a blow that rocked the cabin without anyone touching it. Natalie stood still, her face unchanged, but her eyes sinking into a colder layer. A new sheet of ice fell inside her, thick, sharp, brittle. She said nothing. She let Linda burn in the fire she had lit herself. Linda stepped forward, her arm jerked up. No one reacted in time. No one shouted. No one intervened. Linda's hand came down hard, sharp, poisonous. A dry crack rang through the cabin louder than the engines. It was not the sound of a conflict. It was the sound of a career shattering in an instant. Natalie did not step back. Her head only tilted with the force of the slap. Her glasses slipped. Her beanie slid off, revealing dark hair tucked at the nape of her neck. A hot sting spread across her cheek. The cabin stopped breathing. At the far end, a click echoed. A phone rose camera already recording. A witness capturing the moment that would change everything. Linda realized it too late. Her face drained. Her body locked. She had stepped past a line she had never dared cross in 3 decades. Natalie slowly turned back. Calm. Flat. Cold. Her eyes were no longer serene. They were empty. A kind of emptiness more frightening than rage. Linda stepped back half a pace, panic choking her inside the power she thought she controlled. And in a single breath, the world was about to change. Linda had no idea that the slap was not the ending. It was the opening scene of the verdict, about to fall on her life. Natalie stood before her without shouting, without threatening, simply existing. And painfully clear, Linda had just slapped the wrong person. The click of a second camera echoed from row 30, like a slow chisel carving into stone. No one spoke. No one moved. The cabin had become a sealed box containing an explosion that had not yet made a sound, but everyone could feel the shock wave expanding, filling every breath. Linda stood frozen in the aisle, her hand still trembling after the slap, her eyes wide, like someone who had just pushed herself over the edge without meaning to. But instead of stepping back, her arrogant instinct forced her forward. Another mistake. Another step into the dark. "Everyone listen to me," Linda shouted, her voice cracking higher than normal, soaked in panic disguised as authority. "This passenger just threatened me. You all saw," but the sentence died in her throat. No one nodded. No one supported her. Instead, dozens of eyes looked at her, the way people look at a horrific accident unfolding in real time. Several passengers now held their phones up openly. A young woman lifted her live stream to TikTok, her horn steady. Natalie touched the frame of her glasses and adjusted it. She calmly picked up her fallen beanie and slipped it into her hoodie pocket. No defense, no outrage, no shouting. Her silence peeled away Linda's confidence layer by layer. Something in the cabin shifted. The air tilted. And for the first time in nearly 3 decades on the job, Linda was no longer in control. Natalie turned to Emily, her voice soft, but sharp as a blade drawn from its sheath. "Please bring me an ice pack." Emily swallowed hard. Yes. She ran into the galley like someone escaping a fire. Linda roared. "No one serves her. She is a disruptive passenger, I demand." Natalie looked at her. One look, short, direct, cold enough to clamp around Linda's throat like an invisible hand. No shout, no threat, just one stare that drowned every noise. Emily returned with the ice pack trembling in her hands. "Thank you," Natalie said quietly, and Emily understood instantly. The gratitude was not for the service, but for the courage. Linda saw that, and it ignited her fury. No. I will not let you take over my cabin. I am the one in charge here, A voice rose from row 2. 9, cutting through her hysteria. A middle-aged woman stood up. "No, you are not in charge. We saw everything. You hit her." Linda whipped around, eyes widening further. "What did you say? A man in seat 3-1. Charlie raised his phone. "I recorded from the moment you insulted that elderly man." Surprised, the camera is crystal clear. The cabin erupted in murmurs. Seats shifted. People whispered and gasped. An older man spoke firmly. "I am sitting right here." She did nothing wrong. "All of this is your doing." Linda staggered. She turned to Natalie again, desperate to shove the blame onto her. But what she saw was not anger, not fear. It was composure that did not belong to someone who had just been slapped. A quiet authority that made Linda, a creature who had ruled the sky for decades, feel ancient, instinctive danger dragging her backward. "I will call the captain," Linda shrieked, clinging to the idea as if he were the last god still on her side. She stumbled toward the galley, her voice cracking. "Captain, captain!" "A passenger is attacking the cabin." But Natalie had already stood up. She stepped toward Mr. Harold, her voice soft, but carrying the weight of someone who could command without raising her tone. "Are you all right, sir?" Harold nodded repeatedly, as if Natalie's kindness overwhelmed him too much to speak. His eyes glistened. You did not deserve that. I am so sorry. I only spilled a few drops." Natalie placed a hand on his shoulder. "It is not your fault." The cabin fell completely silent. That moment, a disguised CEO slapped across the face, yet still shielding the vulnerable, struck something deep within everyone watching. They did not know she was a CEO. but they felt true authority shifting toward the woman standing beside the elderly man. The cockpit door opened. The captain stepped out. He saw Linda pointing at Natalie like a drowning person, clawing at the last drifting plank. She is the disruptive passenger. She attacked me. Natalie said nothing. She did not need to. Others spoke for her. That is not true. I recorded it. She slapped her. We all saw it. She also yelled at the old man. Dozens of voices surged like a wave, sweeping away Linda's lie in seconds. The captain hesitated. He looked at Linda, then at Natalie, then at the more than 10 phones held up toward him. His authority, once towering over every conflict inside a plane, was stripped away in a single breath by the cabin itself. There was a flicker of doubt in his eyes that Linda had never seen before. Finally, Natalie spoke. Not loud, not hurried, not shaking. I want to report verbal abuse and physical assault. I want police present at the gate upon landing. Linda froze as if kicked in the chest. She knew what that meant. It was a verdict, an ending, but what she didn't know was that the woman who just said those words held power far greater than any police or captain. And the cabin, along with every recording camera, had just witnessed the beginning of the biggest reckoning in the 28-year reign Linda Garrett had carved into the sky. No one knew who Natalie Brooks was, but everyone knew one thing: she had just slapped the wrong person. And the real storm had only begun. The noise of the cabin after the slap and the confrontation slowly dissolved into a silence stretched tight like a violin string. No one spoke yet. Every gaze pointed in the same direction, toward Natalie Brooks in seat 2-8. Bravo holding an ice pack to her cheek, and toward Linda Garrett in the front galley, trembling in the silence she herself had created. No more muttering, no more authoritative footsteps, no more red nails tapping trays. Only shaky breaths, the steady hum of the engines, and the overwhelming sense that everything had slipped beyond control. Natalie kept the ice pack in one place without shifting it, not because of pain, but to ensure the cabin saw the bruise forming on her cheek, a living piece of evidence that could never be erased. She stared straight ahead, eyes steady, but her awareness expanded like a full-circle camera, capturing the entire cabin. There was no noise, but there was movement. Phones raised, hesitant glances, the subtle swallowing of passengers trying not to draw attention. They all knew that from this moment on, the situation was no longer just about a rude flight attendant. It had surpassed the boundaries of airline etiquette and crossed into the realm of moral failure. They were inside a moment destined to become news. Emily appeared beside her, breath shaky, clutching a crumpled tissue. I'm sorry for everything. Her voice was small but sincere. Natalie turned her eyes, softening for the first time since the chaos began. It's not your fault. Emily bit her lip, wanting to say more, wanting to expose what she had seen for years, wanting to explain what no one asked her, but the words stuck in her throat. She nodded slightly and slipped back behind the rows, her face tense, knowing she had just chosen the side Linda never forgave anyone for choosing. The captain returned to the cockpit, his voice trembling slightly through the intercom. We will maintain a normal flight. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. His voice carried the subtle shake of a man whose invisible power had just been stripped away by the cabin's collective judgment. He knew he had to stay neutral, but the passengers had already exposed that neutrality, as helplessness, making the word normal sound emptier than ever. Linda slumped onto the jump seat, her hands trembling, as if she could tear time open and step back into the moment before the slap. Her breathing was fast and uneven. She knew the cabin was not on her side. She knew even the captain could not save her once the video spread. But what terrified her most was not the cameras, nor the police, nor the reports. What terrified her was the calm in Natalie's eyes, too controlled for someone who had just been struck calm enough to make Linda feel she was facing a force she had never encountered in her 28 years of flying. In the middle of the cabin, the faint vibration of a phone buzzed inside Natalie's hoodie. A message. She opened it under the cool blue glow of the screen. Legal team has received the report. Daniel is already on the way to LAX. Another message followed. Airport police will be waiting at Gate Bravo 44. Natalie closed the phone, her expression unchanged. But calm did not mean relief. It was the cold steadiness of someone accustomed to commanding consequences far larger than a slap. She thought of Harold, of the passengers treated like trash in the airline her father dedicated his life to building, of ignored complaints of the phrase difficult customer, of meetings where toxic attitudes were brushed aside as too ingrained to fix. And she knew Linda was only the visible tip of a much larger problem. 30 minutes later, the cabin fell into an uncanny quiet. Passengers were afraid to make noise, as if any sound might trigger Linda or ignite the tension hovering in the air. Emily worked alone, avoiding the forward galley where Linda hid like a shadow. Each time she passed row 28, her eyes lingered on Natalie a moment too long, offering another silent apology. The whole cabin felt like a shared wound. A passenger whispered, "She's so strong." The person beside her replied, "No one else would have dared stand up like that." But they didn't know this was not courage. This was the quiet of someone who held power. Someone who knew that when the plane touched the ground, the balance would flip with the force of a falling sky. 2 hours later, the captain's voice came through soft but stiff. "We are preparing for landing." The cabin filled with the rustling of seatbelts, paper bags, the soft clatter of items being arranged before descent. But no one was thinking about arrival. No one was thinking about baggage. Everyone was waiting for the verdict, waiting for the truth, waiting to see what would happen to the woman in seat 28 Bravo and the lead flight attendant cowering at the front. Natalie fastened her seatbelt, her eyes fixed on the small window where the city of Los Angeles glowed brighter as they descended. She felt the aircraft bank the engines quieting. She felt the cabin hold its breath with her. Linda inhaled in sharp, uneven bursts, her fingers interlocked until the knuckles turned white. She tried to reassure herself with thoughts of the captain of regulations of her ability to accuse someone of being a disruptive passenger. But the moment she imagined the dozens of cameras in the cabin, her whole body trembled. The plane touched the runway. A soft jolt, then a long glide. Cabin lights brightened. Engines dropped to their lowest hum, and every passenger realized the moment had arrived, the defining moment. And the only person who was not shaking, not gripping an armrest, not even changing her breath was Natalie. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood the instant the ding sounded. Not hurried, not slow, simply rising. A man whispered, "She's about to do something." A woman whispered back, "No, she doesn't need to do anything. The truth is doing it for her." Outside the aircraft door, firm footsteps echoed. A voice familiar to anyone in the aviation industry called out sharp and authoritative, "Where is Miss Brooks?" Linda snapped her head up, her face drained of color. Passengers glanced at each other, eyes wide. Natalie said nothing. She simply stepped forward. And in that single moment, the entire cabin understood. Linda understood. The captain understood. Emily understood. They had not just slapped a woman. They had slapped the wrong woman. And now the bill had arrived. Daniel Pierce stepped into the cabin like a blade slicing through suffocating air. A grey suit, decisive steps, an expression carved from stone. No one knew who he was, but everyone felt something monumental had arrived. Some passengers whispered, others raised their phones higher, sensing this moment would become a 1,000,000-view video. Emily shot upright as if struck by electricity. Oh my God! She recognized him. The executive vice president of Aurora Air. A man who only appeared when a situation had escalated beyond cabin authority, beyond security teams, beyond anything the crew had ever dealt with. Linda stopped breathing. Her legs weakened. Her hands clutched the galley counter to keep from collapsing. When Daniel looked at her, his eyes were so cold, she felt she was facing not a superior, but a verdict. A verdict that already knew every charge before the accused could speak. Daniel didn't look at her long. He turned, scanning. Where is she? His voice wasn't loud, but it sliced through the silence like metal hitting steel. Natalie stepped out from her row. No lowered head, no shrinking back, no avoidance. Just presence, steady and upright, as if she had been standing in this moment her entire life. Daniel saw her, and in that instant, something shifted in his face, something heavy and raw, like a man seeing a wound on someone he cared for. He moved closer, his steps quickening. Natalie. Linda heard the name, and her face twisted confused. But the cabin understood. Each second stretched like a countdown to disaster. Daniel stopped in front of Natalie, looking at the bruise on her cheek, the rising dark from the slap. His eyes turned to cold steel. My God, are you all right? No corporate filter, no superior to subordinate tone. In that single moment, the entire cabin knew the woman who had been slapped was no ordinary passenger. Linda felt a hand tightening around her throat. Natalie. She is just a passenger. A disruptive passenger. Daniel turned to her, a single look enough to buckle the strongest knees. Do not say another word. The captain stepped out of the cockpit, trying to mask his fear. Mr. Pierce, be quiet. Daniel didn't look at him. I didn't ask you. The cabin held its breath. The power in the room shifted like a steel door slamming on its hinges. From Linda to Natalie. From abuse to judgment. From lies to truth. 2 LAX officers appeared at the aircraft door. One spoke. We were informed of a disruptive passenger, but the word disruptive had barely left his lips before Daniel turned his voice sharp as a scalpel. No, the person you need to speak with is lead flight attendant Linda Garrett. The cabin erupted in gasps and murmurs. The live stream camera shook as the passenger filming tried to hold the phone steady. Linda's jaw fell open without sound. That is, you don't understand. You assaulted a passenger, Daniel said, each word hitting like a hammer. You humiliated an elderly man. You used racist language. And you struck. He paused. The CEO of the airline you work for. Linda could no longer stand. She slumped against the galley wall, her skin turning the color of ash. A few passengers covered their mouths. A man whispered, "The CEO. Oh my God!" Another answered, "She slapped the CEO. She actually slapped the CEO." One of the officers blinked. You're the CEO." Natalie nodded slightly, still holding the ice pack. "Natalie Brooks, employee code 001. Linda stuttered like a snapped violin string. I didn't know. I didn't. If I knew you were Natalie, spoke softly, quieter than a drip of water. Yet every ear heard her. You don't need to know who I am to know you have no right to hit anyone. A choking sob escaped Linda. I'm sorry, I was stressed. I didn't mean I just your attitude. I only stop, Natalie said. Not raised, not harsh, just stop. But it landed like an invisible hand, closing around Linda's throat. Daniel turned to the officers. We will provide all evidence. There are multiple witnesses. Complete video footage. The airline will fully cooperate and assist you with the report. Then he looked at Natalie. Do you want to pursue criminal charges? Linda broke down, sobbing. No, please, please don't. I've worked 28 years. This job is my whole life. Natalie looked at her. Not angry, not hateful, just cold as winter water. 28 years and you never learned how to treat another human being. Linda collapsed onto the jump seat. Natalie turned to the officers. No criminal charges. Linda exhaled sharply, a drowning woman reaching air. But the relief died instantly when Natalie continued. Because the legal system is not where cruelty is corrected, we will handle this within the company. It was not forgiveness. It was sentencing. Daniel signaled to the security team waiting at the door. Escort her out of this area. Confiscate her badge, her uniform, and her access privileges immediately. Linda screamed. No, please don't, I'm begging you. But 2 security staff entered their hands, firm but respectful, guiding her away as she crumbled like a shadow torn from a wall. The cabin fell silent, and in that silence, a passenger whispered, trembling, my God, she just watched herself bury her own career. Natalie stood in the aisle, not needing power to command the space. She only needed truth, and truth stood beside her now, sharp, still, and absolute. No one knew where the rest of this flight would lead. But everyone understood one thing. Linda Garrett had just fallen from a sky she thought she owned, and the woman in seat 28 Bravo was not just a victim. She was the storm that would sweep an entire toxic culture out of the sky. The cabin door opened fully, and the cold air from the jet bridge poured in, sweeping through the aisle like a blade clearing the path for truth. The footsteps of airport security echoed firm, steady, and absolute. They stood at the entrance of the bridge waiting for instructions. No one spoke. Passengers watched from their seats, holding their breath. Those still live streaming raised their phones higher, the frame trembling slightly with their racing pulse. Linda was held on both sides by security, yet she still twisted back, clinging to the doorframe like someone being pulled off a ship, drifting into a dark sea. Please listen to me. I can explain. I really did not know who she was. I just. Natalie stepped forward. Not quickly, not slowly, not angrily. Just with a calm presence that made the aisle seem to widen, as if even the air moved aside to avoid obstructing her path. Linda fell silent the instant Natalie approached. Her face was distorted, streaked with tears cutting through makeup, red lipstick smeared into a bruised shade. Her eyes shook like a candle flame caught in a strong wind. Natalie stood before her like a perfectly still ocean, beautiful, deep, and dangerously composed. You slapped me. Natalie's voice was smooth, almost factual. You humiliated Mr. Jenkins. You made a racist remark, and you lied to the entire cabin. Linda nodded frantically, tears flowing as if someone had severed the emotional strings she had held together for decades. I know I was wrong. I lost control. You have to understand I was stressed. Natalie tilted her head slightly, examining Linda as if she were a broken artifact. Stress doesn't turn someone into an attacker. It only reveals who they already are. Linda collapsed against the service counter, her entire body shaking. A woman who once barked orders at a whole cabin, who once made passengers shrink in fear, now shrank into a trembling shadow of herself. But Natalie didn't comfort her, didn't soften, didn't step back. She let Linda face the mirror she had avoided all her life. Footsteps approached from behind. Harold Jenkins, the elderly man who had been humiliated, was gently assisted down the aisle by a crew member. He came forward, looking at Linda, then at Natalie. "Young lady, are you all right?" he asked softly, his voice warm like an old blanket, but trembling. Natalie nodded, gently touching his arm. "I'm fine. And you, I'm all right. But no one deserves to be treated the way she treated us." The simple trembling truth of his words swept through the cabin like a moral verdict, stronger than any corporate regulation. A young passenger in row 3-1 spoke loudly, clear and unwavering. "We'll testify for her." A woman in 2-9 Alpha added, "So will I." The man live streaming nodded vigorously. "This video shows everything from the moment she insulted him." Daniel stood beside Natalie. Hands clenched his expression, burning with restrained fury, the discipline of leadership, holding it steady. "Everyone thank you," he addressed the cabin. "Your truth will become part of the official record. This is no longer an incident. This is evidence to help us clean out a culture that has rotted for far too long." The statement made Linda break into louder sobs. "Rotten culture I've worked nearly 3 decades. I gave this airline my entire youth." Natalie did not let her finish. "And you poured your bitterness onto passengers for that entire time. People who contribute do not cause harm. You did." Security placed their hands on Linda's shoulders, signaling it was time. Linda grabbed at the air, desperately searching for one last excuse. "You can't do this." "I have rights." Natalie looked directly into her eyes, her voice low and metallic. "You have no rights left to claim. Not shouted, not cruel, just truth. Truth steady and immovable." A security officer asked Natalie, "Ms. Brooks, how would you like us to proceed?" Natalie looked at Linda, who was trembling like a brittle leaf. "Do not humiliate her further. Take her out through a private route, and make sure all videos and testimonies are preserved for me." Linda collapsed at those words. Not because she was being treated gently, but because in that moment she finally understood the woman she had slapped, the woman she thought was just another nuisance in the cabin, possessed the kind of authority Linda had forgotten existed. Power that did not need to raise its voice. Linda was escorted away. No one clapped. No one mocked her. No one said she deserved it. The cabin remained silent, as if everyone had just witnessed a verdict carried out without a gavel. Only Emily stood nearby, hands trembling, looking at Natalie the way someone looks at the leader of a fight. They themselves were always too afraid to start. When will this end?" Emily whispered. Natalie answered immediately, her voice calm but firm. "When this company has no one left who acts like she did." Emily nodded softly, her eyes glowing with something that had not appeared once during the flight hope. Harold touched Natalie's wrist gently. "Thank you, child. You're stronger than anyone I've ever seen." Natalie bowed her head slightly. "Not strong, sir. Just unwilling to let this continue." Harold smiled weakly. "And that's what strength is." The cabin finally began to move. Passengers filed out of the plane. but slower than usual, as if they wanted one more look at the woman who had changed the entire atmosphere of the sky in a single morning. Daniel leaned close, voice low and proud. "You stayed calm better than anyone I've ever seen in a situation like this." Natalie answered without hesitation. "Calm is easy when you know you're about to fix everything." Her tone was not that of a victim. It was the tone of someone preparing to dissect a broken system. Outside the glass door, the Aurora Air legal team waited. One of them saw the bruise on Natalie's cheek and grimaced. Daniel stepped closer to them, lowering his voice. "Everything changes today, and we start by removing every root that created someone like Linda Garrett." Natalie stepped out of the aircraft, not with the posture of someone who had been slapped, but with the presence of someone ready to rewrite the rules. And behind her, the cabin remained utterly silent, as if everyone understood that this moment would become part of Aurora Air's history. Not because of the slap, but because the woman who was slapped stood up, walked out, and decided to change the sky. Terminal Bravo 44 glowed under cold white lights, each bulb reflected on the polished floor like a film set, preparing to capture the most defining confrontation of Linda Garrett's life. Aurora Air's legal team stood in formation, their faces tight, their eyes locked on Natalie, as if she were the epicenter of an explosion they had long anticipated, but could never stop. No one uttered a word. Every gaze fixed on the faint purple bruise spreading across Natalie's cheek, a living piece of evidence that instantly made the crowded hallway part, like water opening a wide path, as though she carried an authority no one dared obstruct. Daniel walked beside her, followed by 2 police officers and the LAX station manager, whose face was drained pale as paper at the realization that this incident would surface in press briefings, in reports, in internal communications, and eventually in the hands of the board of directors. Natalie walked slowly each step, cold and steady, as if approaching a courtroom where she was both witness and judge. A company employee spotted her and froze hands, trembling. The CEO, "My God, what happened?" Daniel cast a single glance. The employee fell silent. Natalie stopped in front of the glass door of the temporary hearing room where statements would be taken. From inside, muffled noise spilled out chairs, papers, frantic whispers. They had all heard the rumors already. Flight attendant slapped a passenger. Passenger was the CEO. Entire cabin witnessed it. News spreading like dry fire. And when Natalie stepped inside, every sound vanished. People stood. Some straightened instinctively, as if in a military ceremony. Daniel lowered his voice. "We start whenever you're ready." Natalie didn't look at him. Her eyes surveyed the room, every face, every attempt to hide panic and shame on behalf of the airline. "I'm ready," she said. A young lawyer's hands trembled as he passed her a form. "Ms. Brooks, before we take your statement, I just want to say, on behalf of all of us, we are deeply sorry for what happened." Natalie did not acknowledge the apology, not out of pride, but because apologies had no value in this moment. The only currency that mattered now was change. She pulled out a chair and sat. The wooden surface felt cold beneath her palms. The air thickened, as if everyone was waiting for her permission to breathe. "Please start from the beginning of the flight," one lawyer said quietly. "Can you describe the events in order?" Natalie looked straight ahead. "No, I will describe the system." Heads lifted. "I was not slapped because I am a passenger. I was slapped because this system has allowed someone like Linda Garrett to exist for 28 years. She did not hit me out of impatience or stress. She hit me because she believed she was protected. The room stopped moving. Passengers insulted. Elders humiliated. Junior staff suffocated. Respect treated like a luxury. Natalie continued, and everyone in this room knows it. There are reports, there are complaints, and no one did anything. A senior attorney bowed his head slightly, as if someone had just exposed a long-buried silence. I will not let this happen again. Her voice was not loud, yet it struck each person like a nail hammered into steel. I will not allow Aurora Air to be a place where kindness is rare and cruelty is allowed to rise. A legal officer spoke quiet and hesitant. So are you proposing a disciplinary procedure? Natalie looked directly at him. No, I am rebuilding the entire procedure. A pen slipped from someone's hand. Another person exhaled sharply, realizing the true storm had just been unleashed. First, collect statements from every passenger who stepped forward. Retrieve the full video from seat 31, Charlie, immediately. Ensure encrypted backups. Second, HR must freeze all of Linda Garrett's records right now. I want every buried complaint unearthed. Third, prepare an official apology letter for Mr. Jenkins before he leaves the airport. Fourth, schedule an emergency meeting with the head of human resources, the director of cabin services, and the entire executive board. Tonight, someone asked in a shaky tone. And the captain? He called police based solely on the lead attendant's claim. How do you want to handle him? Natalie pressed her palms against the table and leaned in slightly. Her eyes glinted like metal cutting through dust. I want to know why he did not verify the truth before calling law enforcement on a passenger. I want to know why he believed the aggressor and not the victim. And I want to ensure this never happens again. No one replied. No one dared meet her gaze. That was not the gaze of someone who had been slapped. It was the gaze of someone preparing to rebuild an empire. At that moment, the door burst open. An employee rushed in, breathless. Ms. Brooks, the video is going viral, more than 2 million views in 10 minutes. Natalie did not turn, did not change her expression. She spoke one sentence that sent a cold ripple down every spine in the room. Good. Let the entire world see what we need to fix. She stood. The atmosphere stepped back to make room, as if witnessing the first steps of a revolution. Daniel watched her, the way a man watches another pull a runaway train away from the edge of a cliff. What are you going to do first? Natalie answered without hesitation, her eyes on the long, bright hallway ahead, as if she could already see the future of the airline. Everything. The temporary briefing room felt far too small for the storm forming around Natalie Brooks. Tense faces shifted aside as she stepped away from the table, as if an invisible force field surrounded her, radiating absolute control. Not the kind of power that comes from a job title, but the power of someone who carried the entire truth in her hands and knew that from this moment forward no one could hide from it. The sliding door opened. The long hallway toward the business lounge carried an eerie stillness. A young employee hurried after her, clutching a stack of papers, his voice shaking. Ms. Brooks, we've prepared a summary of all complaints filed against Linda Garrett over the past 5 years. There are more than we expected. Natalie stopped, turned, and took the stack. She did not rush to read it. She simply felt its weight. How many? The young man swallowed. 43 reports. More than half were never reviewed. A thin, sharp breath cut across her chest. Not explosive anger. a cold fury like shattered glass. Find out who her direct supervisor was. Bring all those files to the LAX operations room. I'm not waiting for tonight's meeting. He nodded quickly and ran off. Natalie continued walking. She saw the legal team discussing urgently police officers taking statements in a corner, and Emily standing at a distance, leaning against a wall, eyes red hands, twisting anxiously. Natalie walked straight toward her. Emily startled, standing upright, almost trying to hide her hands behind her back. Ms. Rhodes. "Ah, yes, Miss Brooks," Emily stammered, her face flushing like a child called to the front of the class. Natalie looked directly at her. "Are you prepared to write a full report? Everything you saw? No omissions? No fear?" Emily swallowed her tears and lifted her chin. There was something new in her eyes, a fragile but rising courage born from the chaos of the day. "I'll write everything. No hiding. No one else should ever go through this again." Natalie nodded slightly. "Good." A group of passengers walked by and stopped when they recognized her. An elderly man touched her hand gently. "Thank you for standing up." A woman whispered, "What we saw today should never happen. To anyone." They did not ask for photos. They did not raise their phones. They spoke the truth. Natalie lowered her head in acknowledgement. Their gratitude was not because she was the CEO. It came from the human instinct to stand beside someone who had stepped into injustice and said enough. Daniel approached, speaking low so only she could hear. "The operations room is ready. LAX, HR, and the head of operations are waiting." Natalie continued walking, and when the glass doors to the operations room slid open, the entire airport management team, from the station manager to the cabin crew supervisor to the head of operations, rose to their feet as though someone had planted a flagpole in the center of the room. Some bowed their heads. Others looked away, unable to meet her gaze. Bright ceiling lights illuminated every inch of the room, too bright to hide even a flicker of emotion. The flight schedule board glowed behind them, but all attention was fixed on Natalie, the woman entering the room like the gravitational center had shifted around her. Natalie did not sit. She stood at the head of the steel conference table, placing one hand lightly on its surface. "I want a direct report of every failure that happened today, and I want to know why a flight attendant with more than 40 complaints was allowed to remain in the cabin." The operations director swallowed. That situation was handled by lower-level management, which level Natalie cut in. "The cabin crew manager in New York. Bring me that person's file." He hesitated. "Ms. Brooks, that manager is currently on leave. We can't reach. This is not a request. This is an order." The room froze. In that moment, everyone saw clearly what kind of power Natalie held. The power that needed no shouting, no fist on the table, only the right words at the right time to move entire structures beneath her. Another manager spoke defensively. We trusted the senior lead attendant. She had experience and experience for what if all it produced was harm, Natalie asked. No one had an answer. She straightened her voice even as steel. "Today is not the failure of one person. This is the result of a toxic culture allowed to grow for years. It began with silence, with compromise, with fear of losing a job, with fear of challenging seniority." She looked each of them in the eye. "I will not allow that to exist for one more day." In the corner, a staff member's phone lit up. The video from Flight 771 just reached 8 million views, he whispered, but loud enough for the room to hear. The entire room held its breath. Natalie tilted her head slightly, her voice no louder, but weighted tenfold. Good. The faster the truth spreads, the stronger our mandate to fix this becomes. Daniel looked at her. What's your next move? Natalie took a slow breath, not to steady herself, but to prepare for the next escalation. Gather the communications team. Meeting immediately. I want a public statement in 30 minutes. What message? Natalie looked toward the glass doors where passengers were walking by, then back at the room, her voice sharp as the edge of shattered crystal. That Aurora Air is not just terminating an employee. We are ending an entire era. The hallway leading to the second conference room was so quiet you could hear the ventilation fans humming overhead. But beneath that stillness, Natalie Brooks felt something else, moving, the kind of fear refined in people who hold power and have just realized they allowed something poisonous to grow under their watch. The glass door slid open, revealing a group of higher-level managers standing close together, like a row of statues, trying to appear calm, yet unable to hide the urgency vibrating in each breath. Natalie stepped inside the bruise on her cheek, becoming the first thing they all looked at. No introductions were needed, no preface. She simply stood tall, one hand resting lightly on the edge of the wooden table, her gaze sweeping over each person, as if examining the layers of responsibility they had avoided for years. I want to know, she said, her voice flat but heavy as metal, why 43 passenger complaints were buried, and who signed off on keeping Linda Garrett in the role of lead flight attendant. No one answered. A regional HR director adjusted his glasses, his voice cracking slightly. That was within the oversight of the New York cabin crew supervisor. They reported that all complaints had been reviewed and no severe misconduct was found. Natalie looked directly at him. Not found, or not wanted to be found. He lowered his eyes, silence becoming his confession. Daniel stood behind her, a wall of support for the weight she was pressing onto the entire management structure. A female supervisor spoke, her voice noticeably small. The seniority system, it's old. We were used to trusting those with many years of experience. We didn't want conflict with the long-timers. Natalie gave a faint, humorless smile. Afraid of seniority, more than afraid of failing passengers. More afraid of upsetting internal politics than protecting the people we serve. That is our problem. Someone tried to speak, but Natalie raised her hand, slightly signaling them to stop without even turning her head. Pure control. Today, she continued, an elderly passenger was humiliated. A young attendant was crushed by pressure. An entire cabin witnessed an act of violence. And the only reason the truth did not get buried again is because I, the person who was slapped, happened to be the CEO. The room froze. No one dared breathe too loudly. Let me be clear. Natalie said, her voice low but piercing. If the person hit today had not been me, this incident would have vanished. The video would not be collected. The report would be edited. Linda would be back in the sky tomorrow, hurting someone else again. She raised her chin. And that is why tonight we are rewriting the entire structure you assumed was still working. A manager tried to steady his voice. Ms. Brooks, how deep do you intend to change? Natalie did not hesitate. To the root. All flight attendant evaluation processes. All complaint handling procedures. The entire seniority framework. If anything helped create Linda Garrett, that thing must be removed. No one objected. No one dared. Under the bright white lights, Everyone understood they were witnessing not the reaction of a CEO who had been slapped, but the rise of a leader who refused to let cruelty hide behind a uniform for one more minute. Natalie turned toward the doorway, where the distant noise of the terminal echoed through. "This is not a crisis," she said, before stepping out. "This is a chance to rebuild." The operations room opened into a larger conference hall, and this time it was not just airport management present. The long table at the front was filled with people: the head of security, national legal representatives, the communications director, the regional operations director, and several faces Natalie recognized as those who only appeared when a crisis was severe enough to reach the uppermost levels of leadership. The cold white terminal lights reflected off the bruise on Natalie's cheek, and that image alone shifted the entire room's pressure. No one asked her to sit. No one dared begin. Pens on the table were perfectly still, as if afraid to make a sound at the wrong moment. Daniel offered her a glass of water, but Natalie didn't take it. She stood in the center of the room, looking at each person, as though stripping away every layer of defense they were still trying to hide behind. Today, she said, one of this airline's most important flights became a stage for unchecked cruelty. And none of us have the right to pretend this was an isolated incident. The communications director clasped his hands together. We are preparing an official press release. We can frame the narrative to reduce the impact. Natalie's stare cut him off instantly. Reduce the impact. A flight attendant slapped a passenger on board. An elderly man was humiliated. A cabin full of witnesses saw it all, and the footage was online within minutes. We do not reduce anything. We confront it. No one dared add another suggestion. The air thickened into a waiting silence. Natalie turned to the regional operations director. "I want all data related to conduct, attitude, and internal ratings for every cabin crew member from the past 5 years." He startled. "All of it." "Immediately that will—" "Not immediately," Natalie said. "Now," a legal officer spoke quietly. "Ms. Brooks, we are talking about structural level changes. How deep are you planning to reform?" Natalie stepped forward. "No more untouchable seniority. No more supervisors hiding misconduct. No more reward systems based on time served instead of competence. We rebuild from the foundation." Her voice was not loud, but it spread through every corner of the room. And the most frightening thing for them was not what she said, but the fact she said it, without pausing for breath, without wavering once. Another person, the head of security, cautiously asked, "We need to know, how do you want to handle the captain?" Natalie looked at him as though she had been waiting hours for that exact question. He failed to verify the truth before calling police to detain a black passenger. That is not just negligence. It is a failure of ethical duty. I want him suspended, pending investigation. A pen clattered onto the floor at the back of the room. Someone had dropped it from sheer tension. No one bent to pick it up. Natalie continued, "I also want a new training program. Not the pointless 2-hour briefings repeating the same empty lines. I want a nationwide 3-day course on dignity, service, and conflict. Anyone who fails does not fly." Daniel glanced around the room, noting the faces. Worry, fear, a few attempting to mask panic. But in the end, no one objected. Not because they agreed, but because not one of them held enough authority to stand against Natalie at this moment. The communications director raised his hand weakly. "Then what message do we send to the public?" Natalie turned her gaze toward him, then toward the glass doors where baggage handlers and passengers moved under the bright airport lights. Her voice came down low, sharp, heavy, every word like a strike against the table. We tell the truth, that Aurora Air does not hide wrongdoing, that we do not protect those who cause harm, that we stand with passengers, and that what happened today is the final line. She paused. Starting tomorrow, this airline will not be the same. Natalie Brooks's story reveals a truth every leadership expert understands, that real power does not come from the title behind your name. It comes from the courage to face what is wrong and rebuild an entire culture that has rotted from within. A slap on a flight was only the surface of the problem, but the way Natalie transformed that moment into a catalyst to resurrect the entire system is where the real value lies. When an organization meets a crisis, what determines collapse or elevation is whether the person leading it has the strength to choose the truth. If you believe kindness must be protected and injustice must be called out, then like and subscribe to follow stories that expose the dark corners and honor the resilience of the human spirit. And leave a comment with the 3 words, "Stand for Truth."